Okay, so I've just got this one slide because I thought, given the fact that it's raining, it's January, it's cold, and this event, Soundwaves, took place last summer, and this gives you some sense of what it was like and the context it was taking place in. Soundwaves was this heritage network is funded by Connected Communities, which you probably all know about, so I don't need to explain about that. But it's Arts and Humanities Research Council funded. And every year for the past few years, they've had an event in the summer that sort of disseminates outputs, findings from all kinds of research projects and brings them together. Last summer, for the first time, they ran those events throughout the country. We put in a bid to run an event in St Ives in Cornwall, and that's where Soundwaves took place. The project itself, it was very small. It was just a 2-day workshop, just a small amount of funds to bring people together and do some creative, interpretive work with heritage, with the heritage of St Ives. So there's a history to this. A number of different projects informed this work. First of all, a Heritage Lottery funded bid that we did about 6 years ago, which was a consortium bid between Tate St Ives, Falmouth University, where I was working at that point, the St Ives Archive, St Ives Art School, and Leach Pottery. And our idea was that St Ives is really well known in terms of its artists. Lots of oral history work has been done with those artists, but that sits and resides in the Tate Gallery in London. And we wanted something that was much more embedded in the community itself. So we bid for funding to do oral history work with members of the community who aren't necessarily artists themselves, although some of them were, but also the community that worked and lived with those artists. So, for instance, the taxi driver that there was only one taxi driver in town, and he would always pick up Patrick Heron, and take him everywhere and all that kind of thing. So, and it's the stories, the family firm that provided clay for the Leach pottery. It's still the same family firm, in fact. Etc. So it was those kind of nuanced stories of living next door to artists, working with them, them being your friends, etc. that we wanted to get at. So we had this oral history archive sitting in the St Ives archive, and it's also available in Tate St Ives actually. And we wanted to think, it's sitting there, and people, it's just not so easy to access. This kind of material isn't. So we wanted to start to think about how we might encourage that kind of access and how we might do it in interpretive ways that are relevant to the contemporary situation in that place today, for instance in St Ives, but this could apply, of course, anywhere. And we wanted to start to think about contemporary issues. A lot of, in the oral history material, there's all kinds of issues and debates emerging in terms of, for instance, employment, in terms of ecology and the environment, in terms of really what those artists were doing. Barbara Hepworth being kind of one kind of example, who then set up a studio at St Ives and opted to work there. She was a globally renowned artist, but she wanted to stay and work in St Ives. Actually quite separate, intentionally separate from urban centres. So we want to think about that. And another connected community project we've done actually around retail and the high street had sort of suggested that there were some lovely archives about people's memories of the high street as it had been, and of course in these kind of rural areas the high streets are emptying out. And we were thinking about this kind of material as a kind of creative trigger to thinking about what happens about the heritage and history of place and how that might inform contemporary activism, contemporary ideas about how we live in a place, how we work together as communities to change things, etc. So that was the starting point for the Soundwaves event, which was a 2-day workshop. We brought a range of people who work with heritage together, including artists, and particularly thinking about sound, oral history, sound work, that kind of immersive sound, etc. So working with spoken word in all kinds of ways. We also linked up with community radio stations, and in this case with Resonance Radio, although they're based in in London. Two people who work for residents kindly came down and worked with us. And we had one day of talking in this lovely environment. This is looking out onto the beach. This is Porthmeor Studios in St Ives, which are artist studios that people can rent. And they have a lovely space there for workshops. And this is looking out onto the sea. So Soundwaves, waves and sound waves, radio waves, etc. So we had a day of conversations, and then we had a hands-on workshop where we got together in groups and worked with excerpts of material from the Memory Bay archive to remix it, to interpret it in a very playful way. We only had, sort of an hour or something to work with this material, so I've got some of the results to play for you, but, please be gentle. It's very rough. The idea is rough cut. But, this is just, as I say, very fun. But it was such good fun to do, I have to say. So the idea is this sort of working with this material, you hear it, but not only that, you start thinking about it in different ways, and you get engaged with it in ways that you wouldn't if you were just listening to it. You're actually making with it. So I've got a bit about sort of the kind of theory that informed this. What time do I have to finish? And then I've got a little sound piece. I'm just wondering whether I should go on to the sound piece first, or...
It's up to you.
What time do I finish?
You've got 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
15 minutes?
Another 15 minutes,
Just
okay. I'll probably just do a little bit of a... So these are some of the ideas that are informing this, and I want to make sure you hear some things. So, unpacking the discursive constructions of heritage and community as contested domains, Emma Waterton and Steve Watson call for a new account of heritage in relation to community engagement that questions who a particular narrative belongs to. They draw on the notion of authored heritage discourse, whereby heritage objects are ciphers for dominant cultural constructs and discourses, to support an argument that in the UK, the past has been sealed off from the present, to quote them, purged of political tensions, and represented by collections of professionally interpreted artefacts and buildings, something that I'm sure you're all familiar with. Such assumptions result in the virtual disappearance of dissonance and more nuanced understandings of heritage and community, we argue, and this restricts the value of heritage for imaginative and contemporary engagement and citizen activism. We work with this idea that I've written about quite a bit of quiet activism that's kind of embedded in making and doing. Waterton and Watson point out that paradoxically, while we have the label public heritage, there is no distinct role for the public within the management process, so communities, aside perhaps from white middle class groups, tend to be marginalised. They foreground the significance of community engagement as a living feature of contemporary heritage practice, a lived process within the diverse definitions of heritage, as for instance archaeology, museums, memory, built and intangible heritage. Our projects build on this wide concept of heritage, using creative processes such as immersive sound, storytelling, performance, crafts practice, etc., to agentise communities, so that living history becomes an active part of current concerns, events or campaigns, through, for instance, citizen journalism, link-ups with community radio, crafts groups, performances, events, etc. We also do quite a lot of work with maker spaces. Currently working with colleagues at Wolverhampton University, we're developing an oral history project about the Sikh genocide, for instance, and we want to use embroidery and sewing. So we find that's a way of building trust and actually materialising, embodying memory and stories. It is a very interesting way as well of approaching this. This project's focus on community engagement through creative interpretations and responses to oral history suggests a living heritage model that promotes agency, moving beyond concerns with preservation and professional interpretation to foreground negotiations with meaning, place, identity and cultural experience. As such, it carries the potential for a more critical practice of community engagement that questions heritage narratives and their ownership. Interestingly, and probably a lot of you are aware of this as well, the Royal Society of Arts, the RSA, with their interest, lively interest in heritage, have produced this new tool, this digital tool, this mapping tool. Have you had a look at that? people. If you haven't had a look at it, do have a look at it. It's on, just Google RSA, it's on their website. It's called the Heritage Index. And it's, as I say, it's a mapping tool they've pulled together. It covers the whole of, it doesn't cover Scotland, but it covers England and Ireland, I think, maybe as well. And you can click on it, you can find any place and you can click on it, and what they've done is they've brought together what the numbers of heritage projects, objects, buildings, etc. What heritage different places have got, and it's scored in all kind of different ways. But they've also looked at how that heritage is used, at projects that are going around, the doing around that kind of heritage. So it's really interesting to see the relationship between where is heritage rich, where is heritage poor, but where are people doing lots of it, where are people doing less. Anyway, it's a great tool. The idea is it's a starting point. And then it's linked up with Heritage Lottery funding, and the idea is that this is a starting point for people then going on and doing other more engagement work with their Cornwall, for instance, where this project was taking place. Interesting, it's very heritage light, surprisingly enough, but it's very rich in people doing things. Yeah, so it's a good place to go. Anyway, I think that gives you a bit of an idea of where we are, and I'll just play this short sound file. This work was done with one of my students, one of my PhD students, Jeannie Sinclair, who actually also works at Tate St Ives, and she's the kind of community engagement officer there and works with something called the Look Group, which I think, and she couldn't make it here, but she's done a little short sound file about her work, very briefly, and then to play some excerpts from these pieces that we made. Right.
Soundwaves is part of my PhD research, which uses oral histories from St Ives Archive to create an alternative history of St Ives' creative community. I use oral history and sound to explore ideas of community and place. My name is Jeannie Sinclair. I'm Assistant Learning Curator for Look Groups at Tate St Ives, Research Fellow at St Ives Archive, and I'm currently finishing my PhD at Falmouth University. My working title is We Came for the Parties, Art, Community and Place in St Ives, and I work with the St Ives Oral History Collection to examine the post-war art colony. I use methodologies associated with music in my research, placing the emphasis on listening to oral histories to find rhythms, refrains, echoes and resonance that create alternative histories of community and place. Oral history archives can be hard to access for general audiences. The Memory Bay Oral History Archive is made by the community for the community. How can we make oral histories accessible to the community that they belong to? How can we emphasise the importance of listening to these voices? The first workshop in June 2015 was part of the AHRC Connected Communities Festival. Around 15 to 20 people came together on the first day to talk about community heritage, oral history, radio and sound arts. On the second day, participants created short sound pieces in response to oral histories as a form of community heritage activism. The workshop was led by artists Sophie Mallet and Marie Tosland. We listened together to clips from the archives. The first workshop used a selection of clips from the archive, including one from Emily Woolcock, who worked at the Crusade factory in St Ives, where they produced handmade wood block printed silks in the 1920s. The recording was made in 1974, and you'll hear part of this in the final clip. The second workshop took place in December and focused on the artist Barbara Hepworth as community activist and lover of parties. The first two clips you'll hear are about Hepworth. After learning how to use the equipment, the groups thought about what they wanted to do and then went out to make field recordings in response to the oral histories, then came back together to listen to the sound pieces that they had produced. At Tate St Ives, I've further developed this work to create a sustainable year-long project as part of the HLF Phase 2 project that will continue to work with local communities on remixing the archive. The work produced will be available to listen to in St Ives during the September Festival. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Ooh, hang on.
Well, much of the way we make it. And our first sensibility is the sense of feeling. The very first one we have when we're born. I think every person looking at this sculpture should use his own body. You can't look at the sculpture if you're going to stand stiff as a ramrod and stare at it. With a sculpture, you must
Great party. Yes, party. I love this champagne party. Nothing but the best for Barbara.
walk away from it. Isn't this down hard work? Maybe it's like when easy plan uses a ball and hand.
Oh, thanks, sir.
That's
That's
a
great.
painful wheel.
Oh, should we take that now?
Things like ropes and pulleys and cones and things. So it was a challenge. We watched the shrine goes one by one.
First swallow to access.
Happy Christmas, everybody!
You're in Hepworth's Garden.
Oh, hi there. Have you heard of Barbara Hepworth?
No.
No, I'm afraid I'm not local, so I haven't.
Really? And you, madam, have you heard of Barbara Hepworth?
Yes, I have. She's a sculptor, very,
Famous. I thought it was a men's tailor's.
The end.
Gosh. But as I said before, Mr. Heron was a marvellous man. And we used to have to make cups of tea. Now that's another thing that we never had. No tea breaks. Only the head ones had the tea. Now we apprentices used to have to go to Mr. Asquith. He was the senior in the office staff, you see. I think he was also on the directorship. But we used to have to go to him and ask him for the quarter of tea. And he used to issue us the quarter of tea. And we used to have to take the first cup to Mr. Heron. And then right down through the staff, you know, the head ones. We girls never used to have a bite from 8:30 in the morning till 12:30. We weren't allowed to lift our heads off our work. We were allowed to sing, but not speak. So you can just imagine what hundreds and hundreds of machines were going like, can't you? And we sing.
I do like to stroll along the from, where the brass bands fade away on, So just let me be beside the seaside. I'll be beside myself with thee. And there's lots of girls beside. I should like to be beside the seaside, beside the sea.
But Mr. Heron didn't mind us singing so long as we never took our eyes off our work. But the silk, again, you see, we were never allowed to buy it, not the employees, unless, like at special times, they used to say it was a remnant for sale. But we were never allowed to wear that silk near the job, because of course it was very expensive at that time. 16 and 6 a yard for crusade silk. 16 and 6.
bit of editing there. But we get the idea. Turn it on. Yeah. Okay, so so just...
Soundwaves is part of my PhD research, which uses oral histories from St Ives Archive to create an alternative history of St Ives creative community. I use oral history and sound to explore ideas of community and place.
I stopped it.
Soundwaves is
Oh,
part
no,
of my
it's not
PhD which uses oral
the
histories
trouble
from
about
St
using
Ives
sound.
Archive to create an alternative history
Yeah. Oh, well done, well done. Yeah, so just in conclusion to say, they were very rough cuts, and but it was really good fun. When we were doing this thing, and that was us singing, going up and down the lift and things, trying to get it echo, and we had to improvise. We hadn't got anything, we were trying to make sort of sound of sewing machines by rubbing bits of, metal together what we found on the floor or whatever, so... And it was just really good fun. And so it's just a starting point, a little starting point, but I think hopefully it's an idea that could be taken and developed in different areas and different places. Thank you.